So hello, everybody. It is now 12:02. We're going to start today's presentation. We have a very exciting presentation for you on securing your startup, and I'll introduce our speaker shortly. But welcome to today's webinar. My name is Eric Bitmanis. I am the Program Manager for Private Sector Innovation here at Canary. As of all of our webinars, we are recording this presentation, and it will be available on YouTube shortly after the webinar concludes. If you'd like to ask a question during the presentation, please use the Q&A panel or Q&A option here that we have in Zoom. We have a couple spots during the presentation where we will address questions, so feel free to write questions in the Q&A panel at any time, and we'll get to them during those periods. Now I'd like to pass it over to my colleague Annie Jolicoeur for our introduction in French. Annie?
Merci Eric, bonjour à tous et bienvenue à notre webinaire d'aujourd'hui. Mon nom est Annie Jolicoeur, je suis la spécialiste en prestation de services chez Canary. Juste avant de commencer, quelques petites notes. Donc la première, le webinaire d'aujourd'hui est enregistré et va être disponible sous peu après la conclusion du webinaire. Également, vous devriez avoir reçu une copie de la présentation par courriel, donc vous êtes libre à vous de suivre avec votre propre copie. Également, tout au long de la présentation, sentez-vous bien à l'aise de mettre vos questions en cliquant Q&A au bas de votre écran. Il va y avoir des moments alloués durant la présentation pour répondre aux questions. Alors, sur ce, Eric, je te rends la parole.
Merci, Annie. So for today's webinar, I'll be going quickly through the agenda. We've already gone through our welcome. We have a couple DARE program updates and news before we dive into our presentation on securing your startup presented by Steve Henry from ScalePoynt Solutions. So some quick updates about the DARE program. We have had big changes that have been implemented to the DARE cloud over the last few months. The first was the launch of AWS services on the DARE cloud. We launched AWS services on August 24th, ushering in a whole new DARE cloud for everyone. Some of these services we launched with included Lambda, RDS, IEM Identity Center, API gateways, and many more services. We also released an AWS services roadmap, which currently can be found on our website through the DARE homepage. We are currently in phase 1 of adding new services to the DARE cloud, and some of these services include Web Application Firewall, otherwise known as WAF, Application Load Balancer, otherwise known as ALB, and Route 53. And we greatly encourage your feedback on what services you would like to see us implement next. And to do so, please reach out to us at any time on Slack or via email. The second large change is how we allocate GPU resources in the DARE program. We currently provide 2 avenues for accessing GPU resources. The first is accessing GPU resources on the AWS cloud. If you'd like access to AWS GPU resources, please do reach out to us via email. The second is accessing GPU resources in our own private OpenStack cloud. Our OpenStack cloud is currently at capacity, but we are looking at expanding it and ways to expand access as well. However, if you are waiting for access to our OpenStack GPU resources, we can make AWS GPU resources available to you. And expect to see a small survey arrive in your inbox in the coming weeks. This is a quick 5-minute survey that is designed to help us gain a better understanding of how these recent changes to the DARE Cloud program are impacting your development and your development for your business. Please do fill out the survey when it does arrive. We do provide a free service for entrepreneurs and SMEs and rely on this survey data to continue to evolve the program and its offerings. We also do have numerous upcoming webinars slotted for the coming months. Today, we have How to Secure Your Startup, and in the coming weeks and months, we'll have Amazon's Culture of Innovation and more guest webinars as we move into December and January. Also, a special note for today, ScalePoynt Solutions was kind enough to provide us a contest link for any attendees attending today. Any attendees may use the link that should be now posted in the chat. Once you do access the link, you could submit your information for I believe Steve will be able to provide more information on this, but it's part 1 of securing your MVP or securing your MVP for your startup, complimentary from ScalePoynt. There's the link now. So 1-month security MVP. Perfect. Thank you, Steve. And speaking of Steve, we will pass it over to Steve Henry, who is the CEO and founder of ScalePoynt Solutions, to begin talking about securing your startup. Steve.
Eric, thank you very much, and nice to meet everyone here. We'll get the screen share going and kick this right off. Okay, so today we're talking security for startups. I understand there's a few different sizes of folks that are here. So most of the security that we'll be talking about, I will aim a little bit towards, say, a target audience of an earlier stage startup. You've got, 10 to 20 sort of people there. The same things will apply, whether you're bigger, whether you're smaller. You could be a single person. There might be a few things for the budget that are adjusted, but so you can use a little bit of discretion at that point. So this will be part one. And I'll talk a little bit more about what we'll talk about in the future, but really the main one for this is, if you want to know what it's like as a startup, how to go through this, what are the things that you're going to see, what matters and what doesn't. So really quickly for this one, what I'll start is, here's the 3 goals that I have for you. Number one, the biggest problem that we see with people trying to get started for this is, how do I get started? And how do I make sure the choices I'm making are the right ones? So how do you get an MVP up in the first 3 months? That's what we're going to aim around. One of the pieces I find that's really important, we get asked by a lot of our founders and CEOs are, what are the things I have to do? What are the things that can wait, right? What matters for this? So I like to call it what you skip, what you can't, right? Some things will make you succeed if you skip them. Some things will make you fail. The last one for this will be is, I'd like for you guys to be able to see the finish line. I think the biggest one that makes this difficult is just seeing, give me some stages, give me some steps. And I want to know that if I do these, I will be done and this will work, because I don't want this to be a perpetual compliance exercise that goes on forever and ever. And I've got bigger problems to solve. Okay, so I'm going to give you a very quick origin story or brief history for myself. And one, this is partly to get introduced, but also this is a little bit to credentialize some of the things that I'm going to say in here. As I go through this, I like to give what I would say is a bit of an opinionated view on this. I'm going to tell you some things that I think, this works, this does not work. You might hear this from other people. I strongly disagree with it, and here's why. And the reason I'm going to share some of this context as well too is just so you understand where I'm coming from and why we feel this way, myself and our company as well too, about some of these pieces here. So my security story started a number of years back. We were brought in as a new C-suite for a MarTech company, and we were doing 30 million revenue on 20 mil burn, and we were brought in to take this to profitability and an exit. So we had 6 months to do that based on the burn rate that we had. So we're just flying through money. We're getting 4 to 5 security questionnaires a week. Basically every 20K deal coming in plus is having one of these full security diligence questionnaires. It doesn't matter whether it's an enterprise, mid-stage companies, everybody wanted it. And we were having a 1 to 6 month security delay in this. So of all the things that I took out of this, that we just mentioned there, the biggest one I would point out is that this is slowing down sales. So this was a #1 problem for our CEO, a #1 problem for our head of sales, is that security is the slowest part of the sales cycle. And if we want to turn this company around, we need to improve that part. This can't be the burden on us. So that's when it really first mattered for us. And we had to build a really diligent system while at the same time streamlining the company so we don't have money to throw around. And then very quickly, right after that, I went into an early stage startup, and same sort of thing, right? Every fintech deal that we have, every insurtech, whether it's a partnership, whether it's a sale, the same thing. We're getting the same questionnaires. And it's not just the questionnaires as well too. It goes into all the contract clauses. There's a lot in the contract as well. You're so excited to go and sign this and get this done. But there's things that could involve clawbacks. There's things that could involve liability. There's things that could be huge operational burdens on you that you do not want to have to deal with. We'll talk more about those in the second one of these that we'll do, but just note that this is kind of the scope of where this really impacts this. As a company, and really this is just to contextualize this, and we'll dive right into the material for it. What we really work with is what I would call, there's 3 stages of companies. There's the first one, you're kind of getting your stuff together. There's a second one where what I'd say is you're a functional business. You've got a team, you've got a product and market, you're generating revenue for this. Now you need to start scaling. Third stage is your growth equity, right? Now we want to go big. And what we do as a company, and this I would say heavily influences our view, I find a lot of people that do security out there, a lot of the advice you're going to get, they're hourly consultants. Like that's their business. So there is no advantage for them to do things faster, to do things quicker, to make things more repeatable. And that's where I think as we're going through this, I'd like to give you what is our point of view of how do you do this quick? How do you do this easy? How do you do this repeatable? How do you do only what you need to do at the right time? Don't start too late. Don't start too soon. And the big focus for us as a company overall is we're helping you get to an exit. So security is just a step along the way. It's not the only thing that we do. Okay. So diving right in, the first piece that I'd like to talk a little bit here is what I'd say is like it's a motivator. And one of the rules that I like to have when we're looking at big problems from a business perspective is what's the problem we're trying to solve? And if we don't agree on that, at a C-suite level, then whatever solution we're going to come up with is not going to work. And so there's a couple I put up here that I hear a lot from different founders and different executives that you're working with. And depending who you're talking to in the organization, whether it's your CTO, whether it's your head of sales, whether it's your CFO or the CEO, they're going to have different perspectives. And common ones that come up are we doing this to protect customer data? You know, is it just because compliance is important and we're really excited? Like that's why we're all on this call today, because we really dig compliance and that's where we'd like to be putting our time. Or is it because sales are blocked? And we know that our biggest customers care about this and we can't sell to them. And they have said, if you want to finish our sales cycle, you need to maintain a certain level of security that meets our diligence criteria. And really the answer that I would say this entire thing will be themed around is going to be C for this. It's sales that's driving this. That's why this matters. And as we're going through this, we'll talk about the different areas here. So just from an agenda per day, I'm going to give you a top 5 of things that we've seen, things that really matter, things that are lies that we've seen, or things that I would say are inaccurate, as well as top 5 mistakes. So just a little bit of perspective on, hey, what are things that have come up? And you can see if these have been things that affect you as well. We'll also talk about what I would say are the basics, right? So what are a couple of basic things that matter from the corporate side, the platform side, the customer side? Give you a little bit of a view from MVP to SOC 2, right? What does start to finish and ongoing look like? And 2 pieces that I really like to add to this are, I think it's very important to recognize that as you're trying to roll this out in your org, now I understand this is a little bit different if it's just like one of you at the organization, but if you're a larger organization, at the end of the day, this is a change management exercise. What you're doing is going to touch everyone in your org. It's going to upset people a little bit at different levels, depending their personality types, because you're changing the way that they work. And what I find for this is you will be a lot more effective at this if you take that into consideration. And so when we're looking at things, I like to look at this 2 parts, so number 4 and 5. Number 1, how do you look amazing? There are some perks around this beyond just doing compliance. Right? So this is not just a compliance exercise. You can look really good to your customers, you can look really good to your investors, and you can look good to your team as well inside. And I'll talk about that because this is actually some of the biggest feedback we get from the companies we work with. That's the number 1 thing they always tell us. I like that when we use this right, it makes me look really good. And that was kind of a surprise for us as well too. So I'll tell you more about that as we're going. And lastly for this is adoption. So I want to give a couple tips around this. What are some tools that you can use to make sure you get adoption when you're driving this across your org? Because if people don't pick up, they don't want to do it, it's not going to get anywhere. And then lastly, I'll just tell you very quickly about us and we can go into some questions for it. Okay, so diving in. Context from this here is sales are blocked. We don't want security to be a reason that we cannot do our B2B sales. What do we do about that? So I like to talk about what I would call the top 5 mistakes that I see. Number 1, I need a SOC 2. SOC 2 does not solve your sales problem. And that's why I say this sales problem is so important. What's happening behind the scenes is very important to understand that your customers that are giving you these security diligence in your sales cycles, they are doing this because in their own security programs, which will be the same as yours, you're required to do third-party vendor assessments for security. So just because you've done a SOC 2, that might speed it up a little bit. That might give them a little more confidence. That does not replace, for most companies, security diligence. So just know that doing a SOC 2 is a valuable thing to do. There's a right time that you can do it. And I'll say the right time to do it is, are your customers making you? Not asking you, making you. If you do not do this, we will not sign this contract or we will not renew. Or maybe there's a competitive advantage in the market there where, for instance, we do see this in things like HR tech when you're applying to RFPs and everybody else has it. And so if you don't have it, that can hurt you in the RFP process and you're forced to go through that. But just note for this, doing the SOC 2 at the right time is going to be really important. One of the other ones I've found, I've seen this for early stage companies. Oh, I'll just do it in ISO 27001 as well. Why? Do your customers need it? Are they demanding that of you? Not just suggesting, not just asking. Is this saying, if you do not have this, I won't do it? In North America, SOC 2, in most industries, I'm generalizing a bit here, is going to be the gold standard for this. ISO is a nice extension of that. These are heavy amounts of work. So do bear in mind, there's a big difference I like to say of we have aligned ourselves as an organization with being SOC 2 versus we've completed the audit and we do all the activities going forward. So do note that for you. Look at your customers, what they want. That's the right way to make that decision. What are the pieces that do come up? So I would say from a timing perspective, what is the right time to do security? And I see some people where, hey, we're going to get security going very early on, which I do encourage. However, I've seen people starting to roll out security before they even have a product in market. So you don't have a product. How are you doing security? What are you securing? So this is probably not the best use of your time or resources at this. There is a little bit of nuance as to how you roll out your AWS, how do you roll out your cloud for this. But outside of that, if you don't have a product, if you're not making money, if no one's buying this, again, this is a sales problem. So if you're not selling this to anyone, why are you putting your time into this earlier than maybe you should? This could be a bit of a biased one here. I will say one of my pieces of advice for this, security is hard. We'll go through this till you get a view of the perspective of it. If you're trying to take this on yourself, you typically fall in one of two boxes. One, that's a heck of a lot of work to do, and it distracts from what you're doing, and it distracts from what you're best at. So the second one is, even if you can do it, is it really the best use of your time, right? Can you put, it's kind of, I like to use the analogy if you're building a house at home, right? Sure, maybe you could put a roof on it, but there's roofers for that. You know, you could be spending time with your family. You could be doing more independent contracting for work. Is that the best use of your time, even if you can do it? The last one I'll put on this is buying a tool will solve everything. The problem that you have with these tools is they are valuable. I do like them. Most of them at the end of the day, largely are evidence collection tools. And even some of the ones that we'll see and some of the vendors you can work with for doing security questionnaires, you have to have your processes and procedures written, not just have headings for them and say, here, fill in the blanks for it. And even if there is some templated information available in these, that has to be reflective of how your org works. You can't just show up with a binder of papers and say, look, here you go, someone sent me this binder, now I'm SOC 2 secure. No, they need to reflect what you're actually doing in your organization. And the same from the security auditing side. They can be a little bit dangerous as well too, because in order to do this, you have to automate it. To automate it, you have to be very opinionated. So the tools can be very opinionated. You might be doing something that's perfectly fine, like the way that you're collecting logs, but it wants to see it somewhere else. So if you don't go and actually fine tune these tools, which if you don't know how to do this will be very difficult, then it's actually going to create a whole bunch of new work for you. So these are the few pieces I'm just going to give you some nuance on here, but those are some of the top 5 mistakes that we see. Okay, I like to call these, just to be very bold about this, the top 5 lies that I see. These things, in my opinion, are inaccurate, and I'll explain to you why. Number 1, I need a SOC 2 type 2. So for those that don't know the difference, the first one that you do is a type 1. What this means is like, as of today, I am SOC 2 compliant, which is what all of you need to start with, because unless you were, if you haven't done all your security things before, it's not gonna, you can't test that space for being compliant with it because you hadn't rolled out anything in your organization. Then after you do a type 1, a year later and onward going, you do a type 2. And the only difference is when you do a type 2, they say, show me from Q1 and maybe Q3 where you did this last year, right? So they pick over the last period, which should be a year, whether you've done this before. You will see some of your customers say SOC 2 type 2. Again, you can have a conversation with them. It's not necessary. What you'll go and say is, hey, we're just rolling this out right now. I will have our type 1 done this year in X quarter. And subsequent to that, I will have a type 2 going forward. I've yet to see the security person that's not reasonable on the other side of it to say that makes perfect sense, because until you actually roll out your program, you can't go back a year and say that you've done it. I've seen other organizations come in and say, hey, let's do an audit every 6 months. Again, this goes back to what I said at the beginning, is the number 1 most important part we like to look at is why you're doing this. It's for sales, it's for what our customers expect. The industry standard for this is to expect an audit done every year. So don't go do, I'll see some of them say, do a type 1 immediately, and then 6 months later, do a type 2. No, that's silly. You're wasting time on compliance. Your customers don't expect it. And it's an easy conversation to have with your customers if there's any disagreements on it. Third piece I'll say is everyone is different. In SaaS, there's not that much that's different. One of the biggest things you got from SaaS and cloud is our platform is in the cloud. So 40% of your security diligence is automatically done, because if you're running in the cloud, assuming you're not running servers out of your house in a closet, then you're already done, because AWS or Azure, whoever you're using, has already done that for you. And if you've done things properly in there, there is a bit of an if in there, and you've set them up to a certain standard, then all of your documentation can be very templated. So there is a lot of time savings in here if you align how you build things out. And all of your corporate tools are in the cloud, all of your platforms in the cloud. This is very, very templated and repeatable. One of the pieces that I don't like is anyone that comes in, and I would use this as a red flag for yourself. So you could use this as, how do I assess vendors who can help me with this? Here's 3 options, you pick. Well, no, like if we brought in a security vendor, they should know what the right answer is. You could tell me why if there's one or two different options and, you know, this one costs more, but you can probably get away with this one. Cool, that can make sense. But beyond that, they should be able to advise you, this is the right path, this is what works. If you're a SaaS startup, you're not different than any of the others. There's no reason that for one of you, it should be one option and another, it should be different. The last piece I'll put on this is, so for those who aren't familiar, penetration testing, there's a number of different tests that we can go through. I won't go through in too much detail here, but a pen test is the most expensive one. This is where you essentially, for lack of a better way to put it, you get a third-party white hat hacker to come in and they go and test your infrastructure. This is the industry standard expectation is they do this once a year. Behind the scenes, what you should be doing is a scanning tool, which runs every month, and static scanning tools, which can fit in your CI/CD pipeline. But paying for a pen test every 3 or 6 months is not required by our customers. I do not advise you spend money on it. Very quickly here. So what are some of the 5 worst things that I've seen here? And I'll talk a few of these from a security side, and I'll talk a few where maybe people got a little bit overblown on security. So we've gone into an organization before where when you have key passwords, for instance, like the root password to a database, which no one should ever use, then, well, their CTO had it, they left on bad terms, and they were locked out of prod. So I've been in ones where literally this was unrecoverable. They could not get access to their data, and they were locked out for that. And we had to find ways to kind of hack and work around this and build brand new ones. But this was a really big pain. And what was the problem here? Well, we weren't using some best practices from the beginning. We let some engineers go 6 months ago. You know, instead of having individual accounts where we can just cut off everyone's access when they go, we have a bunch of shared passwords out there. So we find out when we finally do some diligence, hey, they've still got access to our prod, and we can see they've been logging in and literally have no idea what they've been doing, right, into our platform or our tools. So again, this is another big no-no. And some of these things are very basic things that can be solved. If everybody has individual logins, you can terminate them all as soon as they leave the organization. Right? Don't use shared passwords except in very specific situations like root account for AWS. And again, no one should use those, and those should be in a password secret holder. One of the worst things I'll see out there is the founders, the owners of the organization do not have the root credentials to the cloud. So you could literally, you lose a person and that's gone, and you do not know how that relationship's going to go. And that's not something you ever want to be in a spot where you have to figure that out. One of the ones where I find people get a little bit overblown on this. So they get excited about security. They start getting going on it. And then they decide, all right, if a user comes into our platform and they get their login wrong 3 times in a row, then we go lock them out for a few days because that's good security. You know, that way they don't get hacked. Well, people type in passwords wrong. They forget, they change it. Is that really good security? So the questions I would go back to is, number one, is this required by your customers? No. They want you to have a password security policy. SOC 2 expects that as well too. One of the nice things about SOC 2 is there are very, very few things that they are specific about. There's a few industry standards, right? Doing the pen test annually, SOC 2 annually. But in terms of this is not. So I do say that as you're going through this, please bear in mind, you can be very pragmatic with what you're doing. I don't think locking your customers out is the best solution to this. Typically, if someone is hacking you, it's not because they tried 3 passwords in a row. Maybe they took password stuffing from where they found it in other credentials and they hacked it into you, or they use rainbow tables, which are ones where they run through literally like, here's what every one of these could look like in a hash capacity, and they send it across there. But that's very different than, oh, on the 3rd time or 4th time, that's the one that I got them hacked. So this is the chance where I can say you can think about your users as well too. One of the ones that I like to reference a little bit is, okay, the use of your time within an organization. We'll see some people that get very eager around this, and whenever a security question comes up, they go and post it to a channel. There's all kinds of advisors, there's all kinds of team members in there, and there's 6 different opinions that come up. The advice I would give for this is very much like anything else you have in, let's use an analogy. If you have a house at home and you have a problem with your plumbing, what do? You call a plumber. You don't need to call every one of your friends, get everyone in the same channel, all of your family, a couple of other buddies, call a carpenter, call the police, call the fireman, and get 16 people to ask and say, what should I do? No, you know who your person to go is for this. Don't distract the rest of your org. One of the biggest problems I see with security rollout is distraction. You want everyone focused on their job. Security at the end of the scene, behind the scenes for this, is really just discipline and operating maturity. That's what 90% of this comes to. A lot of these are just best practices. If one of the things I would highly advise against is really like bothering everyone in the organization, getting them all distracted, and then having to get to a whole committee together to decide which of the 6 ideas you want to do. If you've got someone looking after this, which is one of the benefits of having someone look after your security. You ask one person, that one person answers it and he solves it. And even better, they probably, if they know what they're doing, they've already got a plan for it. One other piece that I'll mention for this is, so there's two problems in this one. One is, so we've had people go and they will take, well, we need some test data to work with. So they take their production data and they put that in a dev and they go and test it. So number one, huge no-no. Your customer, this is like a giant red flag for your customers. These are the ones they will not bend on. Never do that. Production data only belongs in production. The second piece for it is, then they have a dev environment that, because it's dev, it's not very well secured. You can go and just log into it. You can create accounts. You're not using strong passwords or anything. Because again, it's dev, it's meant to be messed around with. So you've got two problems in there. So just note, these are a couple of things that we've seen come up. If you're ever in these spots, or you could see yourself being in these spots, avoid them. These are ones I would highly avoid looking out for. Okay, so the basics. What I'd like to share for this one here is a little bit of a view of, I want to give you guys a top-down view. How do you look at security in your organization? And then I'm also at the same time, I can give you a little bit of view of what's the order of magnitude of complexity for it, so you can view that. You don't need to know all the details, but you get the big picture of how this fits together. So I like to look at this from three sides. I look at it from corporate. So this is all your processes, procedures, all your back office operating procedures, all that sort of stuff that you have. The second piece is your platform, right? So the platform you've built in the cloud, whatever it is you're offering to your customers, how that's set up, its architecture, its infrastructure. And then the third piece will be your customer. And what I mean by this is your customer facing interactions, the security diligence that you have to go through, any security packages you have to provide for them, having a CISO to speak to them. I find these are three distinct ones that you can look at when you're rolling things out. And I'd look at it from really like half the work is your platform, half the work is corporate, and separate from the rollout, then you need to present that to the people you're presenting to, or your customer. As we're doing this, we actually took account of, we like to do this in a template rollout manner. So just to give you guys a bit of order of magnitude of, hey, what does this look like to roll this out? How much work is it? So there are 18 process and procedures, at least, that we start with to roll this out. These are things that we already have that are templated. We tweak and tailor it a little bit. Note that if you do not have these, this is a ton of work. And if those templates are not reflective of how you're actually going to roll things out, just downloading something off the internet or working generic ones, it's a nice start, but it's still a lot of work to get it done. One of the pieces I will mention out there, you do not hear about this a lot. I don't know why, but it's very important, is what's called a SIG-Lite, spelled the way that you see it right there. So a SIG-Lite is an industry standard for what they call like these shared assessments. So the short version of this is those security questionnaires that you have. There is somewhat of what you could call a standard, but not really a standard, but kind of a standard that exists in the industry. That's why a lot of these diligence questionnaires look very similar, but not quite identical. This is the baseline of which they come from. The way that we work with these to roll it out is we create what I would call a security Bible for it. It's about 70 pages that gives a complete overview of 21 sections top to bottom as to how things should fit together within your organization, how things work, how they put together, and they can reference process and procedures when you need to be more specific for the details. Why is this helpful? So again, go back to what's our number one reason for this. The two pieces I find this makes a really big difference. When you go to your customer and they're usually very skeptical of startups and smaller companies, because obviously this isn't your expertise, and most of them, that's not going to be priority for time, money, or expertise reasons. Go and say, we have a 70-page SIG-Lite. I can even do a quick screen share and scroll through a little bit, or show you the table of contents, which, by the way, we don't like to overshare with our customers on this. And again, it is our internal security, so we don't want to give that away. At the same time, we put together security packages sometime, which will include the table of contents of this, which give them a good view of, oh, there's actually a lot of work done behind the scenes. That's very compelling. That looks good to our customers. At the same time, it's very helpful when the auditors come as well too. So if you are going to do a SOC 2 audit, a lot of your boxes will be checked, but just by referencing the SIG-Lite. And again, these are things that can be templated as well. Okay, so from the one more piece I'll mention for this, as you're actually rolling this out, we template the rollout as well too. So there's 122 tasks that we find that you have to roll out going across different parts of the organization, right? Everything from, are you guys doing background checks? What happens when you onboard employees? What happens when you offboard employees? Are you doing security awareness training? There's a whole bunch of these little pieces across there, 122 checks or updates that we have to make. From the platform side, I won't go into a lot of details on this one. This should be a separate conversation or talk that we will have. but it is really important for this. What's very difficult that we found for this in every organization that I've been in had to do this for ourselves is that it's really hard to do things right. And this is one where I will give some sympathy to that. There's a big race between I need to get something in market, but I want to build it properly. And we all say that we'll go back and fix it later, but we don't. One of the ways that we got around that is we build out Terraform modules, which is infrastructure as code. That's a nice way that you can template what right looks like. So you've got a proper dev QA prod. You've got your platform in separate subnets, separate environments, all those sort of pieces you have. So it's very repeatable. The thing that you do from day one aligns with what you need from the platform side. And the other point to note, and this is just an important one to really take home and drive home, is if your platform looks a certain way, it is a lot easier to template your processes and procedures because the two of them can match. If they don't match, then any templates you have are going to be fairly useless to you because they don't reflect reality. Last piece we'll note for this as well too is everything from the customer facing side. One of the biggest pieces we do find for this is the customers actually really value, like there is an I'll step back a little bit. There is an optics piece to this. There's 100 million things they could ask you about security. There are different levels of leeway that they can provide based on, are you willing to accept this risk? What type of data do you have access to? How secure is this? How much do I trust this organization or get a good feel for the level of security that they have? Because again, they're just giving you questionnaires. So that you actually do find a lot, I find, get some value from having a CISO. Just being able to say, I have someone in our organization specifically responsible for this one task that I know you care about, because they have a security group on their side. And the analogy I like to give for this is when you have to deal with lawyers, when you're at the stage where you have a general counsel and you're able to have your general counsel talk one-on-one with one of their head lawyers, that conversation goes incredibly differently. They know how to speak each other's languages. They can show up and say, before you even go, here's the 9 things I bet you really care about. Let me take you through some of these, how we're security first, how we care about these. And you're like, yeah, don't you hate when people do this? Yeah, cool. We've done that from day one. So a lot of these, I'll just share these nuances and we'll talk more about customers in the second one. I find this makes a really big difference for it. Okay, so security top 10. I want to give you a little bit of how do I get started? What are the first things I can do to get out of the gate that will get me in the right direction so that when I'm working with customers, I'll be in a better spot as well too. I will share that your customers and prospects tend to be actually fairly reasonable if you know how to communicate with them. But they do usually have their own, what I found is a top 5, that if you are not doing these are complete non-starters. They will not let you do anything and your trust will be like ruined right from the beginning. So I'll give a really quick run through of what some of these are and how they affect both sides of this from the corporate and the platform. So this is my version of a top 10 for MVP. Number 1, only use corporate tools. Right? You do not get to use your personal accounts. You do not get to use personal tools. You do not get to use tools that are from other companies or other startups that you may have. That is a huge no-no. It's a huge problem. It's bad from security. It's really bad practices for you, right? You lose that. There's mixed, there's IP issues. You'll actually kind of find everything on here. This is not really security and compliance. This is just general operating maturity and discipline best practices. And so I do like to look at that, by the way, as a secondary benefit of this. Is this not purely just, hey, we need to do this security. A lot of these things will actually make your org function better, and they're really good for you. You know what tools you have, you know what they cost, you know who has access and who doesn't. You're not paying for users you don't need. And when someone onboards, boom, you can get them on board right away. When they leave, you can cut off their access immediately. These are actually really operational efficiency benefits you get from this. Do not use personal email accounts. This is a huge problem. Number 1, it's really hard to get rid of people when they leave for that, because in terms of terminating them sometimes there's information in those accounts, or you did not set up your access properly so that you've got proper root users. It's tied to their personal email. So now you can't take that over. We've seen a lot of people go in and lose access to tools because it's on someone's personal email. Maybe they can't find them. They can't get a hold of them. They don't have a good relationship with them anymore. Maybe they had to let them go. And now you're kind of screwed because any password reset, where's that going to go? Personal email. If it goes to a corporate email, then you can recover it. Set up a wiki. You need documentation as you're going. And if you don't have a wiki, like one of the worst things I see is trying to put these on Google Drive, or whatever your Azure equivalent of that, I would highly avoid that. Number 1, no one's ever going to use it or be able to find it. Not that everyone's going to reference all of your processes and procedures, but some of them they should be able to. You want to be able to update it. You don't want multiple copies floating around. You don't want them on people's personal computers as well. And dealing with all the synchronicity across that, just put it in a wiki, get a Confluence. It's much easier that way. MFA and SSO, this is a definite top 5 one for this. And it makes things so much easier for you as well too. So set up your multi-factor authentication. They actually really care about this. Specifically, they care about it on your platform for not necessarily for your users, but for the administrators, so your developers, anyone that has dev access to your platform, you're going to want MFA on that, right? Because what's the 2 biggest ways you can screw up an organization? You go into their cloud, you blow everything up, you mess around with that stuff, you access their data. Literally, probably the easiest way to hack into that most of the time is not some crazy hack that they've done. It's because they've just got credentials, right? And they ran rainbow tables on it. They found credentials that were posted on the dark web somewhere. They tried obvious passwords. They just plug in, cool, they've got your access, perfect. And the other side of it is the corporate side. Remember, if you forgot your password, well, where does it go? Sends to your corporate email. And also your corporate email has access to all of your sensitive conversations, all your customer conversations. So go in your G Suite or whatever you're using for it, turn on your MFA. That's 2 huge wins there. And then whenever you set up a tool, if you can, use MFA for your login. Why? When someone leaves, you can turn off their access in one spot. Boom, they're immediately gone. Saves you a ton of time, efficiency. It's so much easier. Security awareness training. What's very interesting for this is a huge one for them. They all want you to have this. I would say as a note for this, there are not really rules in the industry or SOC 2, or really even the expectations that much on what happens in the security training. So this is your security awareness training. What's really important for this is that everyone that starts does it in the first month, and you all do it once a year, and it's auditable. So ideally, this means that you can go into your HR system, and your HR system will track when we'll send out, hey, you need to do this. They'll say, hey, here's a reminder you haven't done this, and they can track when you've completed it. That's it. If you've done that, you're set from a compliance side, you're set from a SOC 2 side. I do like to separate in these. There's everything you want to do for best practices. Can we go deeper? Can we focus more on this? I want to improve the organization, all those sort of things. I would call those are extra things that you can do. You can choose to focus on them when and where they make sense for you. The way that I will communicate these will be based on what is mandatory for this. You have to do this because your customers expect it, SOC 2 expects it. Everything else, icing on the cake. If it makes sense, go for it. Okay, quickly from the platform side. One of the biggest benefits you got from cloud was when you put things in the cloud, both all of your tools that you use, right, your software tools, as well as your platform, then all of the infrastructure is secure. There's so much of the questions that you will have that go through in the SOC 2 or security diligence that are just called by, yeah, we have high availability set up for this. Yes, we're in multiple regions. Yes, there's automated backups. Yes, it's encrypted for this. Yes, they have security guards. Yes, they have controlled access for this. Yes, it's an isolated environment. Yes, there's like alarms and monitoring and fire suppression and all these other things. You get that for free with cloud. So simple takeaway from this, always use cloud tools, right? Don't host stuff on your own computers. The amount of overhead you're taking when you care about security, other than just operational risk, is massive. Password management. 2 simple versions of this. Number 1, everybody uses their own password. Don't use other people's. There are few times when you need to share a password. I know we do it sometimes to maybe like save on cost, but if you are doing that, you need to put these in a password manager, right? So this is a 1 password, this is a keeper, this is whatever you're using for that sort of tool for it. This was like the examples I gave you at some of the worst top 5 from before, where, okay, they root credentials for our cloud accounts. Well, they're just, 1 person has them. Cool, like now that 1 person goes, this is gone. You can't have that. They shouldn't be using it. And even best practices, they should never have root access themselves. That's a big fail on a SOC 2 or security diligence. One piece that comes up here, and this is actually one of the biggest things that we find on the platform side that most people have not done, is complete separation of your environments. So dev, QA, and prod. So again, technical will be a separate talk from this, but the single biggest thing that you can do is you do not want to put these all in one account, because then you have to prove that they're separated and how one person can affect the other. And when you're just in one account, yeah, there's one button over here for here's my prod stuff and one button over here. And sure, maybe you logically and technically isolated it, but it's not really that isolated. You have to be able to prove that and show it. It's so much more difficult, and it leaves room for mistakes. It also creates problems later on where there are certain industries you work in that if you're working with offshore teams, they might say, I only want Americans that are working with your production system. And if you've got overseas there, then they might not be okay with that. This doesn't come up all the time, but that is an example where you would actually have no way of separating that. Whereas If you did, you could go and say, okay, cool, our offshore devs, they only work in the lower environments. Production is exclusive access to that account from the following users that are in this region that matter to you. And that's in more of like a higher security area, but it does come up in certain industries. Data belongs in private subnets, right? The simple version of this is your database should never be routable. So you cannot get to the database from the internet. There's a more complicated way to do this. You go through jump servers and bastion hosts and those sort of things. But other than that, it should never be publicly routable. If you're doing that, it's a big faux pas and a big risk. The last one for this is setting up vulnerability scans. So I mentioned earlier, a lot of us get excited about penetration testing. These are easier ones. These tools cost about $2,500 or less a year. They scan it once a month for it. And I think one of the things that I really want to note for this is your automated one. It scans the system and then it gives you your result. It's really quick and easy for that. And it's actually fairly thorough. Your pen test will go further than that. But what's really important is do not waste money on a pen test until you've done your vulnerability scans. This is kind of like, this does all the easy stuff first, and then the pen test goes deeper. Don't pay the people that are time and material billing to go really deep till you've done this. I won't go super deep on this one, other than this is what good environments look like. You want separate dev, QA, and prod. You want to separate those environments. You want to be able to, you can see here that we've got private subnets. We separate our data and our services tiers, and we're not routable for our databases from the internet. There's key management. Like, these are really nice. Like, all the things that come in the cloud. For instance, if you're using automated databases like in AWS, there's RDS, your key management, your encryption, your backup, your recovery, that's all done for you. Your updates, your patching, you don't worry about this. These are all SOC 2 requirements. If you put your own server that has a database on it and try and host it yourself, you have to do all those and have process and procedures and prove and show that you're doing it. If you use a managed one, you get that for free. And again, high availability, right? Automatically fails over another perk that you can get. Okay, from a roadmap perspective, I won't go super deep on this, other than this is one of the biggest things that we like to put together, is it kind of shows, okay, how do I think about this structurally? So the way I like to look at this is phase one is MVP, right? Get the basics in there, kill off a top 10 list, do an assessment of it, get a security roadmap. A big one that's important to me as well too is, what's my budget for this look like, right? From a time perspective, from a people perspective, what tools do I need to buy? When do I need to buy it? And I really like to look at this from taking it the lens of, if you're in the venture capital world, if you are doing fundraising, right? Or maybe there's certain big customer deals that you're working with, you can line the two of these up together. Here are the things that I'm doing right now that get me to a good spot. However, I know I have to close a funding round in the next 6 months. So I will do the rest of this after I close my funding round. That's easy to communicate with your customers. It's good not to waste the time, spend, and energy before it makes sense. And candidly, if you haven't raised money in 6 months, your SOC 2 is not really going to matter because you're not a company anymore. So these are things I like, lining the two of these up from where you're at in an organization, as well as what are the different stages you're going through. The second one I like to focus on is really what I call like your documentation and cloud infrastructure. So short version of this is you're getting all your docs in line. This is really nice. This is where I actually like to outsource this work. This is where I bring in a CISO for it as well too. The reason I say that is they can set all of this up with little to no impact on your org. So phase one and phase two can be done with little impact in your organization if you have that outside help, because they can just work in parallel, right? They know what needs to be done. They haven't really like dug their hands into you guys yet, but they're setting up all of the infrastructure and paperwork around that needs to be done. There's a few things from the infrastructure side as well too. We talked about those, right? Just the big ones. Make sure you have separate accounts. There's no like big mistakes you have in your infrastructure. Phase three, this is where we get into what I would call the security operations rollout. So what this one in is, we're going more into, okay, I said I have all these processes and procedures. Now I need to start doing them. So for example, has everyone done their security awareness training? Let's fix that. Okay, have we run our annual business continuity, disaster recovery, incident response, tabletop exercises? Okay, we need to do that. Do I make sure everybody that is terminated leaves the organization within 24 hours, all of their things are shut off? Okay, well, I need a list of all our vendors and tools and make sure we're actually doing this. Most of these pieces only impact one person at a time, right, that you're working with for that group, but you do need to roll that out. And then phase four for this, and this is the one I say, like, do this, my advice is do it when you need it, right? And this is like your customers are pushing you to do it. It makes financial sense. You guys have the time for it as well too. And that's to do your actual SOC 2. Just really quickly for this, if you want to know what happens for your SOC 2, I would typically say, if I put this into perspective, in general, you can do it a bit faster, but in general, I would say plan for 9 months from the first day you started security to the fastest that you will have a SOC 2 done. You can do it in 6. I'd like to think 9. It's more practical, especially if you don't know what you're doing for it. If you're not an expert, you haven't done it 2 or 3 times before. Where I would say is you typically want to pick your auditor about 6 months out. Part of the reason for this is they are a consulting firm. They do need to staff their organizations. It gives you time to do some price negotiation with them as well too. If you're saying, hey, I'm under the gun, I need this right now, cool, well, you're not going to get any flexibility on that. The next thing that will happen for this is, okay, now we've lined it up. Before you actually start your audit, the 2 to 3 months before that are work that you're doing independently. So this is a really important one to note. Your audit really starts 2 to 3 months before that. It is your job to go and collect that evidence. One of the most important things you will do is make sure your auditor uses a tool for this. If you're sending emails, putting in spreadsheets, do not work with that auditor. Find someone that has a tool. There's about 200 and something pieces of evidence that you need to collect for this. You do not want to do the back and forth on that. That's a massive overhead. And this is where tooling can come in handy if it works, but I recommend generally do that on your second or third one. After you've done all the evidence collection, what the audit will do is they will go and they will start verifying the evidence that you have collected for them. This typically takes a week that you'll work together, a week that they will work by themselves, and then another week, 2 weeks to prepare the results of this. So as you'll notice from this, now you have your SOC 2 type 1. What this means is, as of this date, I am now SOC 2. Then going forward, everything is type 2 after that. The one thing to note is once you've done this, you can't stop doing security, because the next audit you have looks back over that whole year. It's not one time, show me that you did this. It's show me that you did this all the time. And if you didn't do it, you're going to have to sign off in the management section at the end that says, I personally take accountability that even though we weren't doing this, we will do this, or I'm okay with it, or we've accepted this, or we will now fix this now going forward. And I don't like signing my name up on those things. And that also appears on reports that you may need to share with your customers. So just know, once you do this, this becomes permanent. You have to keep doing it all the time. Last 2 pieces I'll go over really quickly here. The single biggest feedback we got when we did a lot of our founder follow-ups after and had conversations with them are they liked how it made them look good. So these are what I call secondary benefits for this. When you can walk into your customer and say, hey, we are security first. Check out our website. I've got a whole security page up there. I know all the things you're going to ask me. Let me rhyme a couple of them up. I'm not technical, but I've got the talking points, right? And that level of diligence that you can show, what I've heard from them, and I can really see from being in those rooms, is it carries a lot further than just security, right? It's a level of confidence, a level of maturity that you can bring to how you're doing that in the entire sales cycle. And humans are humans, right? They understand how you operate. You get a lot of respect from that, and it gives you a lot of credibility when whatever you're trying to sell in that enterprise organization. Even though if you're a little small player, like a small fish in a big pond, you can make yourself look a lot bigger. Investors, this is a very interesting one as well too. With the one-pagers we produce, like the roadmaps, like some of the timelines, like some of the updates, they would tell us, hey, we send these to our investors. They send it to our board members. I'm like, why do you do that? They're like, well, when they see this, they see we got a clearly articulated plan. It makes sense. It's tangible enough, but it's human readable. So they never bother me about this. They bother me about 50 other things, but not these pieces. And so that's a really big perk when you're raising money for this. Again, maturity and discipline can make you look good across a lot of different avenues there. And the last piece would be from the team side. This is a difficult thing to go through because you're going to push people to change and do things differently than they want to. So being able to actually go in here and just say, hey, look, I have an approach. We're going to make some changes, but it will be right. It will be work. And here's the perks that we'll get from this. This will help us raise money. This will help us close our deals. Lastly on this, here's my, my quick top 5. How do we do adoption for this? And then I'll turn this to questions. So adoption, remember the biggest thing, and especially like the larger your organization gets, and this is really difficult, I find, for early stage companies as well too, because a lot of people go into startups because they want to be able to do their own thing and they want to like just have a lot of that freedom. And in a way, you're taking that away from them. In another way, you're saying, no, there's a better way to do this and you can focus on bigger problems. So here's my top 5. Number 1, framing this as a sales problem, not a compliance or engineering problem. So this really helps, for example, when CTOs are trying to push this, hey, I want to get this in early. You need to speak the language of other people. If you just go and say, hey, like, I want to secure everything, security is really important, blah, 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 like no one else cares. If you're like, no, this is going to come up in sales, and I want to make sure this never blocks your sales cycles. Now you've got sales' attention, now you've got the CEO's attention, and I promise you, if both of them care about this, this will happen for you. Blame SOC 2. This is my favorite one. So there are things going to come up that you're going to tell people they have to change the way they do their job a little bit. For instance, you cannot put this on your personal drive. This needs to be on a shared drive. Maybe you need to put this in a wiki. Maybe you need to document something somewhere. Rather than saying, this is what I want, this is how I feel, I like to just have the excuse, guys, if it were up to me, we could do whatever we want, but SOC 2, they say you have to do it, so this is just what we have to do. It is what it is, right? It just takes the personal attack element out of it that some people may feel, and you say, look, it is what it is. If you are, especially from the engineering side, you're trying to push this forward, having a clear budget and roadmap is very helpful. Why? You're going to your engineer, you're going to your leaders and you're saying, here's exactly the plan. Here's exactly how it's going to be impacted. I will show you what we will do. We will do the right things. It is time limited. It is time boxed, and here's what it will cost. And I have the confidence to say this is exactly what will happen. That is a lot easier than what can just be an open-ended box that they don't know where the bottom of the pit is. And that's a lot of times if you're getting pushback, if you're an engineer pushing this forward, that's why you're seeing that. They want to know the impact and cost of this, and they want the confidence that this will be done. And there are stages and milestones along the way. One quick piece that I'll have here is, this is another way of saying the same thing we just did here before, right? Being able to communicate that these are not permanent. This is not something we will be stuck to forever. We can solve this problem and then we will be done. If we go and say, look, there are 18 process and procedures here, right? But once they're done, they were done. That's very valuable. So if you're an engineer pitching this back, showing that there is an end to this, it's very helpful. And the last piece for this is create single owners. Right? You don't need groups for everything. Actually, one of the core activities this in the SOC 2 rollout for this is you have to have owners for each group, each division, its specific thing. There is a person you go to, not just a group for it. That person represents the group. That's really important. And this will help with the adoption as well, too. There's just one person you get on board. When we do the HR stuff, here's my HR person. I'm at the right person. I've got executive level access, and they're the ones that roll this in. And that's it for us. I'll turn it over to the questions, and really just as a quick background for this, if you guys were looking, we're a venture studio. Our expertise is really around AWS cloud, cybersecurity. We've got some executives, and we help take you from a mid-stage company, so a little bit early on, and take you through to an exit where we specialize for private equity. So that's really what we focus on here. Oh, and lastly for this, just as we're closing out, the part 2 of this, what we'll focus on is, okay, now you've got a baseline rolled out. That's what today's conversation was. How do I roll this out within my organization? The next one, how do I present this to a customer? I can be as good as I want behind the scenes or as messy. If I can present well, that makes a huge difference. And again, our rule was, I'm doing this for sales. So we've included the survey link in the chat. Eric and them will send this out in an email after as well too. It's a quick 3-minute survey, super light. We just want to know what you think about this. And if you're interested, what we're giving away is a free 1-month security MVP rollout. So if you remember earlier, we said there's 4 phases to this. We'd love to get people started on this. We'd love to get you started. So if you qualify for it, please fill this out and we will go take you through the first month of this. We'll do this for free, get you started, get you comfortable, get you on the right steps. What you choose to do after that is up to you. And just in general, we're very friendly. So if you would be able to find myself and our company, ScalePoynt, I'm Steve Henry. You'll be able to find us on LinkedIn. You'll have hopefully have our emails here as well too that they'll be able to send out. Just reach out if you just have questions. We're happy to grab a chat. I don't want to bill you for like doing a phone call, like that's silly. So happy to point people in the right directions. Lots of people did this for us along the way. That's how we were able to learn. Very last one I'll put here is we do these things called founder stories. So we like to put together 5-minute clips from other founders telling, not like some wishy-washy testimonial, literally going through these same problems you have. Right? What they felt like at the beginning, right? What were their anxieties? What were the things they tried before? What changed in the first month of rolling this out? How did they feel at the end? What were some of the biggest takeaways from that? And we condense it into 5 minutes because that's, I find, is much more consumable for it. So we have all these on YouTube, and if you fill out our survey, we'll get you on our mailing list for it as well too. We don't like to spam, we send these pieces out. And that is everything. So I'll turn it to Eric for some questions.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Steve. I'm sure that everyone here learned quite a bit from all the information presented, and we already do have a question that has come in. This is from, oh, it doesn't have their name attached to it, but it's they're saying very useful information. For the MVP to SOC 2 process, what is the minimum team size or composition on the startup side that you would recommend? For example, could you go through this kind of process as a team of one leader, which is a founder, and a single part-time engineer?
Yeah, so this is a great question. I would say, let me put this into two buckets. If you are in the venture capital space, I would say until you're really at 10 or 15 people, other than making sure you don't set up your cloud side, your AWS horribly, you're probably starting a little bit too early until you're there. And I'm also using a bit of a proxy for this to go back to what we mentioned at the beginning was, why are you doing this in the first place? And the only thing you can really screw up early on is setting up your cloud really, really, really badly, just because you're not going to fix it. But I'd say the other piece is look at your customer side, right? If you're not making those bigger customer sales, if you're not, there's some general best practices. Sure, encrypt your data, put in a private subnet. Like, don't be silly with your things that you have. But to run out an entire process like this, I would generally say when you're closer to 10 or 15 people, and you're starting to get that customer traction, you're getting that pushback from them, your ability to talk around it is not working anymore. And I do like to say, like it's good to be, that's in a good spot where, okay, get ahead of it, be a little bit more security first. The other piece I would say is if you're falling in the boat of, hey, that's not what we are as a company. Look, we're like 2 or 3 people. It might just be myself. The answer is going to be a little bit different for that. I think, I don't know if I can give a generic one for that, other than I would say definitely do your security MVP. Do your baseline pieces that you can say your security first. You can put up a bit on your website. You can speak to how you're doing best practices. I would say in terms of rolling out of the process and procedures, all the more advanced, really like formal rollouts of this, we can grab a conversation on that if you'd like. At the same time, I would also maybe just say, really like go back to your customers, right? If your customers aren't making you do this, there's a difference between, hey, what would I do to be safe and secure? What would I do versus what do I do if I'm being regulated into compliance, for lack of a better way to think about it.
That's a very good answer. Well, thank you very much for that. Does anyone else have any other questions at this time for Steve while we have him here? I know we are pushing up close to 1 o'clock, so a couple people may have to leave early, and that's completely okay. We will be posting this recording up on YouTube and shortly after the presentation concludes. Any other questions at this time? While we wait for questions.
Sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, Eric, there, the one other thing we will do for this is, so we mentioned those 5-minute founder stories. We'll chop down a version of this to about 5 minutes as well, too. So that'll come out probably about 3 weeks after this. And so for those of you that are interested, or if you want to disseminate this in the org, you wanted to just get a few of the talking points, we'll be able to send that out as well, too. So if you fill the survey, you'll be on the mailing list. You'll be able to get a copy of that.
Perfect. I'm just going to take over a quick screen share here just to finish off my PowerPoint presentation while we wait for any last minute questions. So last call for questions here. Before we finish up the presentation, I will go over really quick about the Booster Pack Builder program. We are still calling on Canadian businesses with experience and expertise in emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, or cybersecurity to share their knowledge with the next generation of startups. We do offer $50,000 as a revenue for successfully building a booster pack for us, as well as the promotion, exposure, and potential connections to new potential partners and clients that could come from the marketing of that booster pack to not only the Dare community, but beyond that. If you are at all interested in checking out how to become a booster pack builder, please do submit an expression of interest online on the Canary website, canary.ca/cloud, and you'll be able to find more information on how to become a booster pack builder. Are there any other questions for Steve at this point? Okay, I'm not seeing any come into the question panel, but I would very much like to thank Steve for taking the time today to talk about how to secure your startup, as well as go from the MVP journey towards SOC 2 compliance. We think it's very important for entrepreneurs and small businesses to be knowledgeable of that area. So thank you very much, Steve, for your time today.
Eric, folks, thanks so much for having us here. Really appreciate you putting this together from the Dare side. Great organization, so definitely look into them as well. And from our side, if you do have any questions, reach out on LinkedIn. Really easy to find us there, and we're very friendly. People helped us along the way, so we're happy to help as well too.
And everyone who did attend today, please do provide your feedback on what you thought of the presentation. We would love to continue to do more of these, so we hope to do that in the future as well. All right, that's all for today. Hope everyone has a good one. Bye all.